The Ascent of Islamic Philosophy, Reason and Mysticism, presented by Feel for Philosophy.
Today, we're diving into a story that spans centuries. It's this incredible, powerful dialogue that took place within Islamic philosophy. Think of it as a grand conversation, a debate between pure reason, deep faith, and mystical experience, all wrestling with some of the biggest questions we've ever asked. And really, at the absolute heart of this entire journey is one single, powerful question. Are reason and faith just total opposites, destined to always clash? Or are they maybe two different paths that lead to the exact same ultimate truth? For centuries, this was the idea that the greatest minds in the Islamic worlds grappled with. So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, it doesn't start in some quiet monastery. It kicks off in the bustling, intellectual heart of the 9th century Abbasid Caliphate, the city of Baghdad. Now, this place, the Beit al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom, was so much more than just a library. You have to imagine it as this supercharged, high-tech hub for translation and research. It was a genuine crucible where the logic of Aristotle, the ideas of Plato, and the wisdom of Persia and India all got translated, debated, and mashed together, creating a totally new intellectual landscape. And out of this amazing intellectual melting pot, our main character, if you will, emerges. It's a tradition known as Falsafa. And Falsafa, simply put, is philosophy. It's this systematic attempt to understand everything, existence, the universe, our place in it, using the powerful tools of logic and reason that were inherited from the ancient Greeks. Okay, so with the stage set, the first major philosophical movement starts to take shape, and it's championed by thinkers who truly believed that reason wasn't a threat to faith, but a gift, a totally valid path to understanding the world. At this time, you've basically got two major intellectual currents flowing. On one side, there's Kalam, which is theology. It uses logic, for sure, but its starting point is divine revelation. It uses reason to defend and explain the principles of faith. But on the other side, you have Falsafa. It sought truth by starting from scratch, from what we can observe and what we can figure out through pure, unadulterated reason. And of course, this new movement had its heroes. First up was Al-Kindi, who's often called the very first philosopher of the Arab world. He saw absolutely no conflict in building a bridge between Greek rationalism and Islamic revelation. And then you have Al-Farabi, a real giant of a thinker, who is known as the second teacher, right after Aristotle himself. Al-Farabi took these philosophical ideas and applied them to everything, from ethics to how a society should be run. So these early pioneers, they really set the stage for what would become the intellectual main event of the era. And I mean, this was not just some polite academic chat. This was a high-stakes debate over the very nature of truth itself. At the absolute peak of Falsafa stands the brilliant Ibn Sina, or Avicenna as he was known in the West. This guy was a true genius, and his philosophical system was just monumental. He came up with this powerful idea, the difference between a necessary being, that's God, who has to exist by definition, and possible beings, which is literally everything else, all of which depends on God to exist. This one idea was a game changer. It provided a purely logical way to think about God's relationship to the universe, and it would shape philosophy for hundreds of years, both in the Islamic world and in Europe. But this total reliance on pure reason, well, it provoked an equally powerful response. The theologian Al-Ghazali steps into the ring. And in his famous book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, he basically argues that reason, when it's left completely unchecked, can lead to conclusions that aren't just wrong, but are actually logically flawed and go against faith. Now, he wasn't anti-logic at all. He was just warning against its arrogance. And the showdown that followed, it was absolutely epic. Al-Ghazali throws down the gauntlet with his book. About a century later, the philosopher Ibn Rushd, also known as Averroes, picks it right up. His response was a masterpiece, and he cheekily titled it The Incoherence of the Incoherence. You gotta love that. The key thing here is that Ibn Rushd wasn't trying to destroy faith. He was arguing that philosophy and faith were just two different but totally harmonious paths to the exact same truth. Okay, let's just pause for a second and look at this timeline. You can see how it all unfolds. We start with Al-Kindi and Al-Farabi, laying the groundwork. Then comes the peak of Falsafa with Ibn Sina, which sparks that great debate between Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd. But notice something. The story doesn't end there. In fact, this huge clash of ideas would lead to something brand new. So, after this massive intellectual battle, you might think one side just wins, right? Well, that's not what happened. Instead, something way more interesting occurred. A new generation of thinkers started to look for a way to create harmony between all these different threads: reason, revelation, and something else entirely. And this brings us to Suhrawardi and his school of illuminationism, or Ishraq. His big idea was that, yes, rational argument is essential, but it's not the whole picture. He said that true, deep knowledge doesn't just come from solving logic puzzles. It comes in a flash of mystical intuition, an insight he described as a divine light. It's a philosophy that engages both the head and the heart. And if Suhrawardi was the one who opened the door to this synthesis, it was a 17th century Persian philosopher named Mulla Sadra who basically built the entire palace. He is the great unifier of our whole story. Mulla Sadra's genius was in creating what he called transcendent theosophy, and his formula was just so elegant. He took the hardcore rationalism of Falsafa, he combined it with the core principles of Kalam theology, and then he integrated both of those with the deep, personal, spiritual experience of Sufi mysticism. The result was this breathtakingly complete system where logic and intuition weren't fighting anymore. They were two pillars holding up the same beautiful building. So why does any of this matter today? Well, because this incredible intellectual journey didn't just stay locked away in Baghdad or Persia. Its echoes would literally reshape the world. Remember Ibn Rushd, the guy who defended reason? Well, when his works were translated into Latin, they landed in Europe like an intellectual bombshell. He became known simply as the commentator because his analysis of Aristotle was so brilliant. It was largely through his work that medieval Europe rediscovered the full power of Greek philosophy, which directly fueled the rise of scholasticism and helped lay the intellectual foundations for the Renaissance. All right, so let's boil this whole whirlwind tour down. First, Islamic philosophy was never just one thing. It was a living, breathing conversation that lasted for centuries. Second, its real genius was in blending that hardcore Greek logic with its own deep spiritual traditions. Third, that famous fight between faith and reason, it wasn't a dead end. It actually forced thinkers to create something richer and more complete. And finally, its influence is everywhere. It's a crucial, unmissable chapter in the story of human thought. Which leaves us with one last thought. In our own world, an age where we often treat science and faith and personal experience like they're in totally separate competing boxes, what can we learn from this tradition that so boldly tried to bring them all together? What can this ancient dialogue really teach us about finding harmony in our own, often fragmented world?
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support encourages me to create more content. Thank you.